You know, for almost 2,000 years, the Book of Revelation has been this source of total fascination and, let's be honest, a lot of fear. It's this complex vision of beasts and prophecy, but what happens when its ancient symbols start looking a little too familiar in our modern world? That's what we're digging into today. What happens when ancient prophecy seems to align with our reality? Let's go ahead and unseal the scroll.
And right away, the prophecy hits you with one of the most chilling images in all of Scripture. A rider whose name is literally death, given power over a quarter of the entire planet. The language is stark, the stakes are cosmic, and it really sets the stage for a series of devastating global upheavals.
So what does a fourth of the Earth actually mean in our time? Well, with a global population of over 8 billion people, do the math. That single fraction translates to an absolutely staggering number, 2 billion lives. It's a jarring way to understand the sheer scale of this text in a very, very modern context. Act 1, the Prophetic Blueprint. So before we can even start looking for modern alignments, we've got to understand the rulebook, right? We need to get a handle on the frameworks that scholars actually use to interpret a text like this. Okay, so the first thing you have to get your head around is that Revelation isn't meant to be read like today's newspaper. It's a specific genre called apocalyptic literature. And that means it uses intense, sometimes bizarre symbols to point to much deeper truths. Truths about power, spiritual warfare, and the grand sweep of history.
Over the centuries, four main ways of looking at this have emerged. You've got preterists, who see it all as history that's already happened. Historicists, who see it unfolding across time. Idealists view it as more of a timeless allegory. But for what we're doing today, that futurist view is key. It's the lens that asks, wait a minute, is this happening now?
The book itself gives us a kind of structure, a timeline of judgment that comes in 3 waves: the seals, the trumpets, and the bowls. A lot of scholars see this as a timeline of intensification, basically a sequence of global crises where each wave is more severe than the one before it. And it's within that timeline that some of the book's most terrifying figures show up. Act 2, a Bestiary of Judgment. Okay, now we meet the truly terrifying figures unleashed within that prophetic timeline. And this isn't just a random collection of monsters, it's a deeply symbolic representation of destructive forces. So, the first wave of judgment kicks off when the seals are opened and boom, out come the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. The idea here is that they aren't literal riders, but symbolic agents of the kinds of suffering that have plagued humanity forever, often seen as just the beginning of sorrows.
And their symbols are really telling, right? The crown on the first rider suggests conquest, or maybe even deception. The great sword of the red horse, that's undeniably war. The scales of the black horse point directly to famine and economic collapse. And finally, the pale horse, as we saw, brings widespread death from disease and all the other disasters combined.
But if you think the horsemen are bad, they're just the beginning. As the trumpet judgments begin to sound, the text describes something even weirder rising from a bottomless pit. And these are not your garden variety insects. They're described as a tormenting horde with a truly bizarre and terrifying look.
Just listen to this description. It's this mashup of war machines, humans, and predatory animals. Now, some modern interpretations have tried to say these are like military helicopters, but many scholars will tell you no, the text is describing something way more unnatural than that.
The text itself is basically signaling that this isn't literal. As one analysis puts it, these physical traits just don't pair up in nature. We're not talking about a biological creature you could go find on a map. Instead, it's using this nightmarish imagery to convey the terrifying, demonic nature of a spiritual force that's been unleashed to torment people.
And that brings us to the book's central antagonist, the beast from the sea. Its appearance is, again, a composite. And this is critical. It actually borrows features from beasts in the Old Testament book of Daniel, which represented the great empires of Babylon, Persia, and Greece.
So interpreters look at this and see all those past empires culminating in one final global system. It's often called a counterfeit kingdom, a worldwide political and economic power that mimics divine authority, but gets its power straight from the source of evil, which the text calls the dragon.
All right, Act 3, the Great Convergence. This is where we put that futurist lens back on and investigate how analysts are seeing these ancient symbols converging with documented global trends. I'm talking geopolitically, technologically, and environmentally, things that are happening right now. Let's start with the historical role of Persia, which is of course modern-day Iran. In ancient times, the Persian king Cyrus was actually called God's anointed because he freed the Jewish people. Fast forward to today, and after the 1979 Islamic Revolution, the Iranian regime has positioned itself as the #1 enemy of the State of Israel. For geopolitical analysts who track prophecy, that complete 180-degree flip is a massive, massive development.
Next, let's talk technology. This is probably the most famous and, for centuries, the most far-fetched prophecy in all of Revelation. It describes an economic system where you literally cannot buy or sell anything without a specific mark. Well, here's the thing. Today, the infrastructure for a system like that is no longer theoretical. Analysts point to this convergence of biometric IDs, central bank digital currencies, and global data networks, and they say that for the first time in history, we have a plausible technological framework for that kind of total economic control. The significance here is huge. A prophecy that was once dismissed as impossible allegory now has a potential blueprint in our everyday tech.
And it's not just geopolitics and technology. Look at this example of what some are calling evidence-based eschatology. Revelation 16 predicts the drying up of the Euphrates River to prepare the way for the kings from the east. Well, today, climate scientists and the Iraqi government itself confirm that the river system is drying up at an alarming rate, with projections that it could actually run dry by 2040. The alignment between the ancient text and the modern documented reality is, to many, pretty striking.
So what are we supposed to do with all of this? We've got the frameworks, the symbols, the modern alignments. It all seems to point beyond simple predictions to a much deeper question for our time.
You see, ultimately, these apparent alignments present a very modern challenge. The goal isn't to get obsessed with predicting a date on a calendar. It's to consider the role of discernment in a world that is changing faster and faster. As the lines between ancient prophecy and current events seem to blur, what does it mean to be prepared? Not in panic, but with purpose. That may be the most important question of all.